Hey deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Depp-Heard trial number 49. T-Sky says, assuming Amber does have borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality, how aware is she of the damage she has caused? Could she be so distorted that she honestly doesn't see Johnny as a victim? The answer is yes. Personality disorders and distortions go hand in hand. Distortions are the hallmark of personality disorders. They don't often phrase it that way, but in all my studies and treatment of people with personality disorders, one of the easiest ways I can describe them is that they are a disorder of perception, and that means that they are distorted. So with borderline people, they distort what they're seeing as evidence of abandonment and betrayal. For histrionic, they will distort what they're seeing as evidence that they are worthless and no one is paying attention to them and no one cares about them in that way. And so could someone with borderline and histrionic distort a relationship such that they believe that they did nothing wrong? Absolutely. It's one of the hallmarks of borderline and histrionic that we will experience when we first start treating people that don't have any insight, is they will believe everyone else is the crazy one and they are completely normal and there's nothing wrong with the way they see things or behave. And that's why it's a personality disorder, because it's pervasive throughout the personality. As opposed to something like depression, often people with depression or anxiety, which is not a personality disorder and is not therefore pervasive through the personality, they often will be able to say, okay, I'm depressed these days, but that's not really rational. I'm down, I don't have any motivation. It's not the real me. The depression feels like it's something that's happening to them instead of it is just them. And that's why it's so hard to treat personality disorders, because one, it's hard to talk with someone and you have to convince them that the sky isn't blue. You have to convince them that it's polka dotted, which is very hard to do for anyone, right? But also the change that has to occur throughout their entire personality, which is obviously very time-consuming and difficult. Time-consuming, I mean, it takes many years. Tatya says this audio that we're listening to in the trial was after the TRO and after she accused him of DV and after the divorce began. She was trying to apologize and get back with him. This is, so yeah, I didn't know that. I found that out later, and you'll see that video when it comes out, that audio comes from that. I didn't know that that's what it was. But yeah, so I got that. And then Tatya says, this is seriously damaging to her case. This was probably one of the most damaging pieces of evidence against Amber Heard. It shows that she was not afraid of him. End of comment. Yeah, so I get that. To me, though, it's not in terms of how I was trying to figure out what was happening. It wasn't a major piece of evidence. It's something for sure, but it to me wasn't, a major piece of damaging evidence against her case. To me, it was the claims of being beaten to unconsciousness 3 times and having pictures of herself shortly after that she took herself trying to document the wounds on her body, and there's no indication on her face, or very little. Let's just put it that way. That to me was the most damaging, because that's the central feature of what she was saying. She was claiming that she was abused, and I think I said this back then, that if she claimed that she was abused but had no pictures at all, then it'd be hard to know what happened, because most people don't take pictures after being abused, and we don't know. But she took pictures. She either took pictures of her face or took pictures of other things, clearly trying to document it, and just didn't take a picture of her face, or did and deleted it, or something. So to me, that was the most damaging. That doesn't mean she wasn't abused, but in terms of damaging her case in court, I think, to me, but everyone has their own take on that. But yeah, I get that. So for what you're saying, Tatya, and maybe others, the fact that after breaking up and after filing for a temporary restraining order claiming that he is a monster and that he's violent, and the divorce is beginning, she goes back to him trying to get him back. And I don't know if we know that for sure, that she was trying to get him back. Maybe we do, and I'm just not aware of that data. But even so, that doesn't mean that she wasn't abused. We all know that abused individuals will go back to their partners an average of something like 7 times before they finally leave the perpetrator. And a lot of the times it's initiated by the victim. They will actually reach out to the perpetrator. And that might seem strange, but that happens. And I could explain as to why, but for time's sake, I won't. Or listen to my other episodes about that, or listen to other episodes on other channels about that, because it's a well-known phenomenon. And so the fact that she went over there, it doesn't, to me, negate that or doesn't eliminate the possibility that she was abused. But I guess to some people it does. Draco says, the issue with the donation is not about her age or whatever she understood about the ramifications of not having money, which was one of my points. That wasn't my entire point, but yeah. The issue is that Amber Heard had stated repeatedly that she already donated the entire amount, and under cross, she finally got cornered on it. So she said she used donated and pledged interchangeably, so that is a lie. Yeah, I mean, is it part of the overall case that she tends to lie? Clearly, that particular detail, it's hard for me to know exactly what's happening. I would have to get her to tell me what was really going on in her mind, because we don't know. She could be trying to cover her bases. It's just hard to know what was really going on. She could even have a better story, but doesn't want to tell it because she thinks it's a bad story to tell, or I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it certainly doesn't make her look good. Now, can someone lie about all those things and still be abused? Yeah. But if it, is the overall case that someone is making that she tends to lie a lot, yeah, it's definitely strong evidence that she tends to lie a lot. There's so many other things she could have said, right? Like, she could have avoided the questions that she was asked on television and in interviews. She could have just been like, well, things are kind of up in the air. I haven't actually given that money yet. I plan to, but I'm in kind of a weird financial, she could have even said, don't ask me those questions because I don't want to get into it with people. Handlers will prep talk show hosts and that kind of thing. I don't know if those things happened, but she was asked the question and she just lied by saying that she had already donated it when she had not donated it. She had pledged it, which is not the same as donating, even though she was saying it was the same, which it's not the same. I can pledge $10 million to a charity. That does not mean I donated $10 million to a charity, right? Like, everyone understands. I can promise, I can predict, make a claim that I'm going to it one day. It'd be like, I tell my wife that I did clean the bathroom, and she's like, it's so dirty. I'm like, well, when I say I did clean the bathroom, I mean I might clean the bathroom in the future. Like, it's just so ridiculous. Yeah. Depp Heard 50 says, is the video, and Blue Peach Whispers said a nice thing. I won't read the whole comment because it seems self-indulgent, but a lot of you said very supportive things, and I did read those, and I do appreciate it. It really does help me. It's like, it's weird how much it inspires me to keep going. Like, it could even just be one sentence. It's just like, hey, I appreciate what you're doing. To me, I keep having this analogy of, I'm a professor, and so a big part of my motivation as a professor is the facial expressions or the questions or the smiles that people have when they walk in my classroom. That there's some humanness, some connection. And when I'm getting attacked, I'm like, well, why am I here? And then I get some people saying, no, we like what you're doing. You don't have to love what I'm doing. You don't have to shower me with compliments, although it's appreciated. But even just because if I were in a room with 100 people, there would be one person that would hate me and might even raise their hand and say you're stupid. But if everyone else is kind of like nodding their head or just pleasantly listening without hating me, I would see it. I would feel it, right? When all I can hear is the negativity, it just deflates the motivation. You're just like, well, I know when I'm not wanted. And I'm the sort of person that will just, slink away. And of course, the numbers don't really reflect that, because there's a lot of people that watch and there's a lot of people that will like the video. But somehow that doesn't feel as real to me as when people just say, hey, like what you're doing, keep doing it. Don't worry about the haters, just like, okay. All right, trigger alert. Fast forward a couple of minutes, because this next comment involves some graphic detail of intimate partner violence. Ashley says, years ago, a partner of mine got mad at me and bashed my face. I passed out for 5 minutes. I had swelling on half of my face and went through different stages of colored bruises until they settled on purple for about a month. It was painful and terrifying to be with him. I remember fearing for my life. I became timid and scared of everything. I became a different person. That was one of the worst experiences of my life. It changed me forever, and it wasn't anything that I would lie about. If this woman, Amber Heard, is lying, I truly think she is despicable. Yeah, if she is lying, it is truly despicable. Ashley, what you went through is horrific. I'm sorry you went through that. I'm glad you're not with that person anymore. I hope that you're getting the treatment that you deserve to have to heal, and a relationship that isn't like that. Also, I think a lot of people can agree with you who have actually been through the experiences that she claims she went through. And hearing your experience with bruising, and I didn't read your whole comment, but the blow that you had, it was one blow, I think, from your description. It wasn't repeated blows to the face. It was one instance, a big blow that caused unconsciousness. But one could argue that your description was less likely to produce permanent or noticeable wounding as what Amber Heard claims she went through, right? And yet Amber Heard showed no sign of those kinds of wounds. And you're saying that you had one strong blow to half of your, to one side of your face, and the bruising was very noticeable for longer than a month. And yeah, that's why I've been reacting the way that I have, because I've seen that before. I think all of us have, probably. Think of Rihanna, right, with Chris Brown and other kinds of things. But I've treated people who have been through that as well, and seen police records for perpetrators who are court mandated to be in treatment. And yeah, so to hear her claim, it's like and again, I think I said this in another video, and I said it in the audio episode, or I'm going to say in the audio episode. I interviewed a lawyer, Attorney Allison, and what she was speculating was that Amber Heard in 2016, when she had to go on the record as to why she wanted a temporary restraining order, she was probably asked, okay, well, justify the temporary restraining order and the accusation of domestic violence. And she provided some details and some evidence, but it probably somehow didn't seem like it was enough, and so she felt like she had to exaggerate, and so she started to just say a bunch of things that wasn't actually true, and she probably knew it wasn't true, but didn't think she would be held accountable for those statements. But those statements were on the record. And she didn't know that Johnny Depp she didn't know that she would eventually publish piece and, in the Washington Post, that also talk on social media a lot. And that in 2022, 6 years later, that Johnny Depp would sue her, and she would have to go on the stand and tell her story. If she tells the story that corresponds with the pictures, which might have been closer to the truth, she would have to refute what she said 6 years earlier, which would throw everything into question, right? Then all of her testimony would be thrown out, potentially, at least in the minds of the jury. So she had to stick with that earlier story. That to me makes the most sense. I mean, who knows? There's 1,000 other explanations. Depp Heard 51. Brandon says, for someone like me with borderline personality disorder, the one thing I have learned throughout my relationship is to be okay with my partner leaving during arguments. Before, I never understood that pursuing my partner made things so much worse. For people with borderline personality disorder, I highly encourage you to talk about this with your spouse and a therapist. It has changed my relationships in the best way. Well, good for you, Brandon. I'm so happy that you have found that and that you are working on it, and that's just great. Mainly you benefit from it, but so does your partner, obviously. Holly says, Dr. Honda, you said something during your discussion of codependency that really struck me. I grew up in an alcoholic home with a codependent mother, and there was a part of me that knew she wanted me to fail at life so I would need her. Your discussion today really validated that hunch. Right. Well, I'm sorry you went through that, Holly. I'm glad you have some healing and some awareness of the unfairness of what you went through. I don't know if this is exactly what you went through, but from your description, it is a somewhat common enough configuration of a family system in which you have the alcoholic parent, the codependent parent, who both of the individuals went through childhood relational traumas that resulted in them being this configuration of the overfunctioner or underfunctioner. And the codependent person needs people to take care of and might need multiple people to take care of that have problems. And they might even socialize their own kids, the codependent individual, into having problems subconsciously so that they can take care of them, which sounds like might have been the case for you, which is awful. Depherd52, overtly girl, says, Dr. Honda, I've been in therapy for 15 years. I've been diagnosed with borderline for 4 years, and I've been watching you for 3 years. You've been monumental in accepting and changing myself as a borderline. End of comment. Well, I am glad, one, that you are getting the help that you deserve to recover from your relational traumas growing up. 15 years of therapy is good. You might need another 15, just saying. Therapy is nice. Stick with it. But the other thing I'll say here is that this helps me currently because there are some people with personality disorders claiming that I'm spreading misinformation about borderline, and I'm like, where did you get that? What did I say? And whenever I respond, I'm like, can you give me a quote or a timestamp of the misinformation? And of course, they never have it. So I'm always like, what are they referring to? It's always so weird, those kinds of accusations. And I've been getting those online for 14 years, but because it always seems like they're so sure of themselves that I must have done it, right? And sometimes I have, and so I will apologize, but more times not, 9 times out of 10. When I ask for some kind of timestamp or example, or even just like a paraphrase of what I said, there's nothing. There's just nothing. And I'm like, are you sure that I did that? And then, of course, I know because I'm a clinician that people distort and have issues. They get triggered, or there's a bell curve of intelligence, and there are trolls and psychopaths. There's a greater percentage of psychopaths commenting online. Research shows that. So in the world, when you're walking around, the chance of you running into a psychopath who actually has no empathy and might even be sadistic and want to harm you for their own giggles is low. The chance of running into someone in public, I don't know, like 1 or 2% or something like that. But online, it's much higher. I don't know the rate, but it might be 5% or something. And just think about that 1 out of 20-ish, don't quote me on that, people that are commenting online are psychopaths. They have no empathy for other human beings. I mean, just think about that. And I always try to remind myself of that. So when I open up the doors to the entire internet, as I did when I started watching the trial, because the entire internet was interested in that, 5%, 4% of the commenters are going to be psychopaths on average. The other thing about psychopaths is they tend to comment more often with more hostility. That research is also out there, which is just kind of weird to think about, that these individuals don't have empathy and they don't care. They might even, like I said, be sadistic. They might even be wanting to hurt your feelings. Now, of course, we have trolls who are pranking, but that's not what I'm talking about. And I'm guessing psychopaths are more likely to troll. But what I'm talking about is people who just are unhinged and are trying to scare you because you disagree with them or something. Anyway, so it helps me to hear, overtly girl, that I have helped you with borderline. And I know that I have because I've treated so many people with borderline with good outcomes, and I have that to bank on. I know a lot of listeners have had similar kinds of feedback to me, and so I need to hear that. Laura's Library says, I work in IP law. Regarding Amber and TMZ, a copyright could not have been obtained if someone hacked Amber's computer. Even if it's not registered, a copyright is owned by the author of the work. In this case, Amber owns the copyright because she made the video. It is simply not possible for TMZ to enforce copyright privileges unless they were sold the copyright by Amber or someone with her approval on her team. End of comment. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that, but that makes sense. I mean, with today's internet world, I guess I was just under the assumption that anyone can post or leak anything. But I feel like I knew some of this, that if you're an organization, if you're a random anonymous person and posting something, then it's kind of different. I suppose you could be sued, right? But if you're a major media organization like TMZ, then you can't just publish a video without approval of the copyright of the owner of the copyright. And typically the people who own the video are the people who took it. And if Amber took that video, which she clearly did, and TMZ was displaying it on their channel, then at some point Amber Heard must have approved of the sale. Either Amber Heard approved of her agent to sell it or whatever, or Amber Heard directly did it and then they reached out to her, but they kept it anonymous because TMZ has an interest in keeping that transaction anonymous so other people can come forward. But their lawyers probably all had it written down, and it's all in a record somewhere. I wonder why that couldn't be subpoenaed. But anyway, so yeah, that makes sense, Laura's Library. Thanks for chiming in with that. Daniel says, I agree with you. I also feel bad for both Amber and Johnny. But being a male that was in a relationship with someone that exhibited very similar behavior as Amber Heard, I really feel sorry for everything Johnny Depp had to go through. Yeah, I think a lot of viewers feel similar to you, Daniel. Regardless of gender, the things that Amber Heard was doing are some classic abusive behaviors. And the way she talks, the kinds of things that would trigger her, the kinds of things that Johnny Depp would say to plead with her. Can I please just go? Is it okay if I go? And that one scene where he's in the car and he wants to go see his kid, and that scene is very common, where he's just like, could I just go hang out with my kid? Is that okay? And she is crying and pleading with him to stay. These are very common scenarios in this type of abusive relationship. All right, George and Anfisa, 90 Day Fiancé, the episode in which Anfisa keys his car. Jane says, I low-keyed enjoyed seeing you riled up and angry about the double parking. Yeah. Just leave it to George to double park. Lindsay says, I find I like being friends with guys because there's less drama funny because I took engineering in university and as a result ended up primarily socializing with men. And let me tell you, all the biggest gossips I knew were the guys. Yeah, the stereotype that women are gossips and dramatic is ridiculous as soon as you hang out with two or more guys. Gossiping and drama is a human tendency, not a female tendency, which is just ridiculous and massively sexist, right? And just untrue. Lorraine, good old Lorraine, says, we have a Jovi scale for drinking. Apparently there was also an Angela scale for abusive behavior. And now we have Anfisa, who has broken the Angela scale of abusive behavior. Yeah. It's funny to think about. I mean, I don't want to mock the people, but in some respects, I was actually thinking about making kind of a cheat sheet of archetypes of personalities or good examples. And Jovi's drinking, although we don't know the extent of his drinking, we did see a few moments where he was pretty intoxicated. And so we can kind of use it as a reference point, right? That we all understand and know about because we all watched that episode, or at least most of you did, and I didn't. And then we know Angela's pattern of abuse. We know now Anfisa's pattern of abuse. But I was thinking about other examples that we could kind of use as touchstones for that type of personality. Made a little list here. Jehoon and self-hatred, Jasmine and preoccupied attachment, Bilal regarding patriarchal behavior, Tanya and Kalani regarding codependency and overfunctioning, and maybe Nicole's mom. And then on the flip side, you got Asuelu, Nicole, and Sinjin to some extent regarding underfunctioning and dependency. We have the Mike of Squim, Washington, and avoidant attachment. We don't know if he has avoidant attachment, but he showed signs of it. The Summit scale of denial, Jenny and Summit, his capacity for denial, which I totally get given what he went through, but he would be dealing with something right in front of his face and just ignore it because he couldn't deal with it, right? It worked out in the end, right? The Kenny and Armando scale of healthy communication, that's healthy. It's not as healthy as Kenny and Armando, but it's still healthy. And the Charlie of Andre and Elizabeth. So Charlie, Elizabeth's brother, we could have the Charlie scale of D-bag-ness or something, dirtbagness. Ariella and Biniam, the sparring fight episode. Krenna says, what was Ari even thinking by jumping in an MMA fighter's face like that? Melissa, the person that Biniam was sparring with, Melissa could put her in the ground just by blinking her fake eyelashes. That's good. And my wife pointed out that you can't, the kind of fake eyelashes or eyelash extensions or whatever that she had, you can't take those off. You have them put on by a professional or something. And so they're just a permanent or semi-permanent part of her thing. And so what, she's supposed to take them off when she spars. Anyway, Ms. Violets says, I used to wrestle and did a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We train with all genders. Nothing is sexual because we are all trying to learn from each other. Yeah. And says, I believe that Ivan Salivary, so I was talking about my old friend Ivan Salivary, who was an MMA fighter. I believe that Ivan Salivary was the only person in UFC history to submit someone via body triangle. Super talented fighter. Very cool that Dr. H used to train with him. Well, I didn't train with him. We would mess around together. I'd been to his gym and, messed around there, but I didn't train with him. And I hope I didn't intimate that. I wrestled when I was younger. I believe he did too. A lot of us guy friends would wrestle 3 a.m. on a Friday night. We'd be like, let's wrestle in the living room. Some of that was me and Ivan was the only guy who could actually beat me. Because when you're trained in some sort of martial art, it's so easy to beat other people. It's just like, because without training, you just don't know what you're doing. And for some reason, I think a lot of guys figure they're good at wrestling just because. And so I would have older guys in college that would challenge me, because they would find out that I was a good wrestler or something. And they're just like, oh, I could take, bigger guys. I could take you. And it's just like, no, you can't. I mean, it wasn't without its cost. I had earrings back then. And I think one of my earrings actually got ripped out. I mean, not like out through the thing, but like, out, and blood was everywhere. But anyway, so Ivan, he was much better eventually, right? But back then, very nice guy, funny guy, dynamic guy. Everyone loved him. I mean, I tend to be friends with guys that are obnoxious / everyone loves. Umberto is like that. To some extent, Bob is kind of like that, even though on the podcast he comes across as very subdued and kind and soft. But in real life, he's the life of the party. He's the center. He's the loud one and the entertainer. And Umberto was definitely like that. And Ivan was totally like that. I mean, he was a charmer. Ivan would walk into a room. Everyone just loved him. And incidentally, I guess while I'm on this topic, he introduced me to club life. So we were 19. He was in the military. So back then that would have been 1990, the club scene, it was just like pre-rave scene, or maybe raves were only in Europe or something. But dance culture and sort of like post-disco culture was really starting to take off. And in Seattle, the cool nightlife was in these few dance clubs that actually had dance music. Think music like D-Light was really big at the time. CNC Music Factory was pretty big at the time. And, everybody, and of course, 70s classics, disco, that kind of stuff. I'm this kind of podunk from a rural area outside Seattle, and George Michael was also really big at the time. Is that Freedom album that he had? He would introduce me around, and I grew up real fast because that crowd they lived in the fast lane. Let's just put it that way. And I just felt like I had no idea what was going on, and all these things were happening, and there were older people, and we would have to sneak into the clubs, and Ivan had all these ways of doing that, and like we would you would lick someone's stamp to make it wet, and then you would copy the stamp. And he had all these pens in his glove box. He would look at the stamp and then he would try to draw it on us, because if you had a stamp, it meant that you had already paid cover, of course, because we didn't have any money for cover. And it also meant that you gave your ID, because it was a 21 and over and we were 19. So kids don't do that. It's wrong. It's illegal. But sometimes you do. I don't even know if I drank, honestly, because I couldn't afford it. It was probably just to get in and do something fun and interesting. It was interesting, very eye-opening to my life. Sai says, I often find myself thinking that I love my partners more than they love me. Right, so I was talking about how Ariella seems to exhibit preoccupied attachment, and people with preoccupied attachment, and I think Ariella even said this, that I'm always loving people more than they love me. I love my partner more than they love me. It's always been that way. It always will be that way. And it is a schema. It's a distortion, and it's a belief system that isn't always true, but the belief sometimes perpetuates those kinds of relationships where it happens. Anyway, Sai says, I often find myself thinking that I love my partners more than they love me, and I have had suspicions that I have an anxious attachment style. But you saying that this is a sign solidified that for me, that I have anxious attachment style. Any advice or more context about this? Where does it come from? Because in my mind, it is a very true feeling. Yeah, well, listen to all my episodes on preoccupied attachment and borderline, because borderline's related to it. You might not have borderline, but a lot of the elements of borderline are present with anxious attachment. And those are audio episodes, so there's hours and hours of lectures and discussions around that. But very quickly, where does it come from? It comes from early attachment injuries and inconsistency. Sometimes abuse, but sometimes not. Essentially, the child learns, I'm kind of worth it, but not really worth it. And so you're getting some attunement, but often it's inconsistent attunement, and could be abusive at times as well. And so the child learns, in order to get my attachment needs met, I need to be hyper vigilant and keep my eye on attachment figures to try to game the system so that I can get a little bit more attachment and attunement and security and safety, because my life depends on it. We evolved to feel that way. I don't know if you can hear that bird. There's this one bird. Springtime, so we moved last year. We didn't live here last spring, and we didn't experience the kind of bird situation. And there are trees like right outside my window. I love birds, but there's something about hearing the same call over and over and over again for hours. You just like, it's like listening to your favorite song. Eventually you just can't take it anymore. It's just like, will you please just change the pitch or rhythm, or just sing, go somewhere else and sing. I'm pretty sure the singing is like they're trying to attract a mate. And I just want to be like, it's not working, stop swiping right. No one's answering. I don't know, it's like, particularly when it happens early in the morning, like at 4, because in Seattle, the sun starts to come up around like 4 in the morning. The birds start going, and of course, I'm still trying to sleep, and it's just like, quiet. Anyway, so where does it come from? It comes from that. It's a very general thing, but you can listen to more of my content for more information on that. Advice or more context about it? Well, it's because usually when we have this assumption that we love people more than other people love us, it's based on the schema that we are going to be rejected. So one, when people do love us as much as we love them, we don't believe it because we assume we're always going to be abandoned and that people don't really care about us, even though we're very acutely aware of how much we care about them. And so it might not even be true. But if we believe this to be true and we're like, I love you so much and I'm not getting love from you, even though they do love us, but they're just not as overt about their love for us. Well, we're going to yell at them, and guess what's going to happen? They're going to not love us so much anymore, and then we'll have strong concrete evidence that we were right all along, that they never loved us, but it was because we assume they don't love us that we caused them not to love us anymore. So that's one of the vicious cycles that happens, and then you rinse and repeat that over and over and over again. And it is true that this person loves people more than they love them because of this unconscious behavior that they're doing to other people. So that's one aspect of it. The other is that because you became hyper vigilant as a child to try to game the system, you neurologically developed to be very aware of what's going on with other people and their emotions, and also very aware of your own emotions. So people with Anxious attachment can be borderline, they can be histrionic, that kind of thing. And they can just feel so much more. Their feelings are the same, but they feel them much more intensely and will signal them much more intensely because they're trying to alert other people, like, pay attention to me, and because that usually would work to get a little bit more attachment and security when they were young. And so when you love each other the same, but you feel your love so much more intensely, and you're desperately not wanting to lose your partner, which can be confused for love, but it's not, I mean, everyone has a different definition of love, but, desperation isn't necessarily what we're talking about when we're talking about love, right? But it can feel like love because you can't stop thinking about your partner, but that might not be love, it might be fear, right? So there's this feeling of, I am very much in love with this person, right? Because I feel feelings more acutely and I'm desperate for them. And so even though they love us in a very intense and appropriate way, they'll never love us as much as we love them because they're not as desperate as we are. And thus, you can have this narrative that you always love other people more than they love you. That's the nutshell. Even Muhammad, number 4, says, that's the video. Patron from Czechia. I thought it was Chechnya, but it's spelled Czechia. So emailed in, went to the website, emailed in, says, "Hi, Dr. Kirk. In the last 90-Day Fiancé episode with Eve and Muhammad, number 4, you explained passive dependent behavior. In the interaction with Eve's friend, you talked about how passive dependent people don't want to feel like someone depends on them. How can I differentiate between the fear of someone depending on me versus a fear of intimacy, especially in romantic relationships? Could this be correlated with a person being the baby or the youngest one in the person's social group?" End of email. Yeah, so good questions. I like that you're thinking about this. It's complicated, but very briefly, when I'm referring to passive dependent, what I'm referring to are the foundations or the commonalities among dependent personality and passive aggressive personality. Some people even consider that to be the same thing in just different subtypes, and I would tend to almost agree. But basically, and you can listen to I've done deep dives on both of those for patrons. But at the core of dependent personality and passive aggressive personality are incompetent schemas, meaning they inherently believe that they're incompetent in things, and they also believe that other people are the source of their safety, that they can't do things on their own. Other people have to do it for them. And it's not a manipulation. They believe that to be true. They 100% believe, I am incompetent. I can do nothing on my own. I will never be able to do anything on my own. And that, that designated person that I depend on, they have all the answers and they can help me and no one else can. Also, another schema for passive aggressive and dependent is that anger is bad. They learned at a young age, often at a very young age, that they cannot be angry in a safe way. And so they learn that any anger feeling they have needs to be immediately eliminated. But it doesn't eliminate the anger, it just makes it subdued and it comes out in other ways. That's why we call it passive aggressive, because the individual ends up having hidden hostility and anger towards other people that they aren't even aware of. They often are terrified or in denial about people depending on them. So when you are involved with someone with dependent personality or passive aggressive, the dependent person it's almost, depending on the degree of their issue, it is to some extent impossible for them to understand in their soul. They might understand it intellectually, but they don't really get it, that their partner depends on them in some way. So what partners will often complain about is the dependent passive-aggressive person doesn't seem to care. If your partner has dependent personality or passive-aggressive personality, you can often feel like your partner doesn't have any empathy. They do have empathy, but they have the empathy of a child. So children have empathy to some extent, a proto-empathy, but age appropriately and in a good way, or in a healthy way, they don't care or concern themselves with the lives of their parents. We don't want children to worry about their parents and their emotional lives and their finances and their life. It would be overwhelming to the child. The child needs to see the parent is all powerful for a lot of developmental reasons, and a lot of damage can happen when that innocence is broken early. And so when you are dependent and passive aggressive, you are stuck in that mindset. So when you are in a partnership with someone, you just don't get that you are responsible for your partner. The passive dependent person does not understand that they are responsible for their partner's feelings. In the same way that a 7-year-old is, has a temper tantrum, and the parents are also having a meltdown, the child is like not necessarily concerned with what the parent is going through emotionally. The parent could come home from work and just be like, oh, it's been such a hard day. Finances are bad. I'm stressed out. And the kid would be like, where's my food? Or how come you haven't played with me? Or, sister took my toy. And in the grand scheme of things, the child's problems are small compared to the parent's problems. But we want the 7-year-old not to worry about that. It's important and it's normal that they don't, and they're more concerned about themselves. They care, like if you gave the child a bat and, a baseball bat, the child wouldn't want to hit the parent over the head with it. They have empathy, they have compassion, they have care, but they don't notice the things that compel caring and compassion. So as an adult, you could be 45 years old, independent, passive aggressive, and just not acknowledge in your soul that you're responsible for your partner or anyone at your level, because you inherently feel incompetent and underfunctioning. And why would anyone that's up here need me? I'm dependent, I'm incompetent. Why would you need me? I'm nothing. I'm a piece of crap. How could you possibly need me? So whereas their partner are just like, I don't see you as incompetent. I don't see you as below me. We are equals. So it can be very frustrating in that way. And also, it's scary to the dependent person that they are equal, because the passive dependent person is terrified of being equal, because that means that they have to do things on their own. And it means that there's no one above them to save them, which is the condition of being adult, right? But they're terrified of that because they were taught when they were very young that they're going to screw it up and they're going to lose everything if they're in control and if they make their own choices. So that's passive. And when I'm saying passive dependent, I'm lumping dependent and passive aggressive together. Fear of someone depending on you, it could be, as I was saying, a symptom or a component of passive dependent because of what I was saying. But fear of someone depending on you could be a lot of things. It could also be avoidant attachment, right? You learned early in life it's just better to have separation emotionally from other people. And when someone depends on you, it means you could disappoint them. And you're just like, I don't want to be blamed for anything, and I don't want to be rejected. So that's not passive dependent, what I'm describing right there. That's avoidant attachment, but it results in both groups of people being fear of having someone dependent on you. Now, fear of intimacy, I don't like that phrase because no one has a fear of intimacy. No one has a fear of commitment. No one has a fear of closeness. What they are afraid of is rejection, because with intimacy means vulnerability, which is another thing that no one's afraid of. No one's afraid of vulnerability. They're afraid of what could happen if they are vulnerable. They're afraid of rejection if they get vulnerable. They're afraid of rejection if they have intimacy. They're afraid of rejection if they commit, including the rejection of guilt trips. So if you commit and then you, I don't want to be with this person anymore, and you have to break up, the person you're breaking up with will reject you by saying, you're a gaslighting narcissist. That's a rejecting thing, even though you're the one breaking up, and no one wants that, right? So fear of intimacy I'd rephrase as a fear of rejection and a defense of avoidance. And it could be related to a fear of someone depending on you, but it might not, right? So these are different things. And then you say, like, how does it relate to being the baby in a family system? And passive dependent people are sometimes the baby, but sometimes not. I could see why you would relate it to that, because it seems like most passive dependent people would be the youngest in a family, but it's not always the case. You can be any birth order and be the passive dependent person. Dana says, thank you for talking about triangulation with Eve and her friends. It's helping me realize that I'm a magnet for triangulation, and I impulsively try to rescue people that I feel can't speak up for themselves or are being mistreated. I mean, I might need to look into that. It's helpful to hear you say that it's not what is best for them all the time, and there's different ways to be helpful other than speaking for them or offering myself up as a scapegoat. Yeah, Dana, music to my ears. This is why I do this stuff. It's because people like you go, didn't know that concept. That provides some context. Now I have power because now I know something and I know how to navigate this. And because my regular impulse was actually playing into the problem, because that's what I was saying was, and it's not always the case, of course, but it's a common enough scenario where your friend comes to you, particularly if they have a hard time with their own issues. They might even be passive dependent, right? Like Eve. And you, hearing their story, they start to push you into an overfunctioning position where you start to look at them. You might even say, like, well, how come you're staying in that relationship? And the passive dependent person's like, I don't know. I just feel like I don't know what. Now, maybe they're being abused, but let's say they're not. Let's just say they're passive dependent. And you're hearing that and you're just like, and they might even say, well, I don't know. He just seems so convincing at times. And he doesn't want me to leave, or I don't know, something like that. Kind of the way Eve, I'm exaggerating, but Eve was kind of talking that way. It's very seductive to become an overfunctioner, particularly if that's typically what you do, and it might be, Dana, where you come from a more overfunctioning codependent place. And it pushes you into that position, and then you start to have these feelings like, hey, someone needs to speak up to that man. Someone needs to say something to that guy. And then you might even at the beginning say, well, maybe you should tell him to F off. And then she's like, well, I don't know. Like, I'm just not that kind of person. And she might even say, can you do it for me? And then you're like, yeah, I'm going to do it for you because you're clearly incompetent. It's not a conscious thought, but that's the awareness of, like, clearly you have, the thing to always ask yourself is, okay, I have an impulse to go after her partner and say X, Y, and Z. Why can't she tell him? Like, is there any reason why this is my job? Like, why do I feel like I can do that and she can't? And often the conscious mind will say, well, I'm just better at that sort of stuff. But usually that doesn't hold water, because an adult can say whatever they want to, especially if they have time to prepare for it. They could always send an email, right? Now, this is, again, barring an abusive situation, and then, so you're just playing into the dynamic, and then the passive dependent person is like, yay, it's just subconsciously, I got someone to express my anger so that I didn't have to. So it's a passive aggression. I'm hostile, and I socialized my friend to yell at my partner, and, mission accomplished, when, of course, nothing has happened, because the partner's going to go, well, that's your friend. And now the friend is being triangulated in the way that Eve and Muhammad are triangulating with the friends, which doesn't make any logical sense, as I hope you can see. The other thing that you are, and the idea is not to tell the passive dependent person, screw you. It's just to be like the way that the friend was to Eve, of just like, well, when I hear this story, it makes me sad, because I'm sad for you and I don't want to lose you as a friend. It's just speaking for, and then what that does is the friend is being asked to be over functioning, but remains a peer. And then when Eve is like, hey, I'm supposed to be triangulating you, and it doesn't work, and the friend is acting in a differentiated way, that actually pulls Eve up. And we saw this with Nicole. We saw this with Asuelu, that if you play into it, then they will continue to be passive dependent. If you don't play into it and remain differentiated, and you're like, I feel an impulse, but I'm not going to do it because I know that's not helpful. I'll stay in contact, but I'm not going to do that. then this person, the underfunctioner, gets the unconscious or conscious message that they're capable doing it on their own. Because when you do it for them, the message is you're an idiot, you can't do things, which is what they're asking. There's this big question mark, like, I'm going to throw this up to you. Am I capable of doing this? Because if I'm not, you probably should take over. If you don't take over, then it's like, oh, well, maybe I can do it. And when you say, well, I'm just sad because I'm going to lose you as a friend, you're kind of coming at someone a little bit under them, because now you're crying to them. And so that pushes them in this place of, oh, I am responsible and no one is going to clean my mess for me. Yeah, this is my thing, And we saw Eve go to Muhammad and start to talk with him more directly, partially because of the way that friend actually reacted, in my opinion. You also point out, Dana, that you don't want to offer yourself up as a scapegoat, which I'm guessing has happened to you because you've seen that process. Underfunctioner, passive dependent person pushes you into it. You're already kind of leaning that way anyway. You go after, and then now both of them can scapegoat you and everything can go back to normal. And you're the one that's suffering in the end. Theory Force says, thank you, Dr. Honda. A lot of new information for me. I had to look long and hard for a memory where someone asked me, what do you want? Right. So I was talking about the cure for passive dependency and lack of connection with self is to have outsiders and from the inside a frequent question, what do I need? What do I feel? What do I want? Theory Force says, I can only remember one time when someone asked me what I want, and it was my therapist. She asked what kind of work I actually wanted to do. Yeah, so in all likelihood, you need to be asking yourself that question and cultivating relationships or explicitly developing relationships where that question is being asked almost on a daily basis, if not more often. Because of what I was saying earlier, that in that video, in which when you ask that question, you start to build the neuronal connections that connect you with your needs and your gut and your reactivity with your evaluation process. And there's this prefrontal cortex limbic thing, and it gets all kind of going, because decision making and noticing what you need is a multi-systemic process in the brain. And when we're young and we don't develop it, or it was cut off somehow, it's really hard to know how we feel, know what that means. How does that match up with what's happening right now? There's a lot of things that have to be working in our personality and brain and nervous system to know what's happening, to know how we feel about it, to evaluate it, to know when to act on it, to say, is this meeting my needs right now? Is this, and to practice that a lot, because a big part of knowing how to get your needs met isn't just knowing your needs. It's like experimenting with enacting your needs and learning what's the best course of action, when maybe sometimes you should just put your needs on the back burner, because sometimes that is best for everyone if you do that. But of course, not all the time, right? So there's a very complicated process of developing wisdom around needs, emotions, what's happening, how do you assert yourself, in what way, how do you interrupt your assertiveness because you're noticing that someone else is being affected because their needs matter too. But maybe sometimes, it's a very complicated thing. And it begins with that question that you want to be cultivating with your children. If you have young kids, you want to be frequently asking them and reflecting to them and talking about your own process within reason, age appropriateness, about emotions, needs, assertiveness, balancing other people's needs. It's something that should be very explicit and verbal that you do with children, because the development of those connections are between, say, like 2 and 4, 2 and 5. And if you miss that window, it's hard to develop it. You can, but it takes a lot longer. That's the thing. It's like learning a new language, essentially. Your brain has to change over time. All right, so Bilal and Shida, number 12. Hey, it's Crystal, says, I don't believe Bilal has OCPD. If it wasn't cleanliness to him, he would just pick something else to, I think, attack Shida about. He is acting from a cultural masculine paradigm of toxic masculinity in the Black community. Systemically, Black men are often made to feel less in society, so they come home to make their partners act out exaggerated submissiveness to make up for it. I love that other people are seeing how toxic his behavior is. End of comment. Yeah, Crystal, you are obviously, you know this, and it's an important phenomenon. Any group of people who are oppressed will have unfortunate side effects, which can include the need to make up for the way you're being treated in society by making other people suffer when you're at home. And you're describing that right now. Not all black men do this, obviously, but some do. And what your claim is that his pickiness on Shida is that. And it could be. And I think perhaps some people would say, like, well, I have OCPD, but I would never do that. In fact, I think Kat says that. Kat says, I have OCPD and I can understand and empathize what's going on with him, but the way he is going about it is not good. I am very uncomfortable with a lot of things in a similar way as he is, but the way he goes about it is next level. Right, so I hope I didn't, but if I did, I want to clear it up. I'm not saying that everyone with OCPD will harm their partners or be patriarchal the way he is. Absolutely not. I'm mildly OCPD, and I hope I'm not like that. So the way in which people with OCPD cope with their OCPD depends, and there are different types. And I've talked about that in my deep dive, that for some people with OCPD, they will be very controlling to people around them. And that's one conceptualization we might be able to hypothesize regarding Bilal. Other people with OCPD will avoid relationships altogether because they don't want other people to mess up their system, or they might have like one person that they're allowed to be around. For example, I treated someone with OCPD who was totally fine with her husband, and her husband could do whatever he wanted to in the house. But as soon as someone else came in, like a family member or a friend or something, as soon as they came in the house, and even as they were on the way over, it's like, oh, my in-laws are coming to the house in 2 months, and there'd be tremendous anxiety about those random people coming into the house and moving things around or making something dirty. So there's a lot of different presentations, and of course none of it is rational. That's the definition of a personality disorder, but it can manifest in a lot of different ways, including what might be considered what Bilal is doing. I don't know if he has OCPD, but his presentation is in line with a particular type and a particular severity. It's not very severe if he does have OCPD, but it could be these other things. Or it could be OCPD and toxic masculinity as well, or some sort of sexism in addition, which would fit, right? Because the patriarchal way that he talks, it would fit with that. But anyway. But good comments, people. All right. Well, next week there will not be a comments video, I think, because of scheduling issues. I missed one a couple weeks ago as well because I was so overworked with the trial videos. And by the way, I just finished recording all the trial videos. I got to the end of the trial, so I have to edit all those videos and then I have to post them. So those will come out this next week. I talk about the whole journey, but just in brief, the trial video thing was an experience for me in a variety of ways. And I feel very fulfilled by it professionally. It gave me a chance to do something that felt meaningful and important to me anyway. And also, I am glad it's over. Well, it's not really over because I still have to edit all that stuff. It takes me forever to edit those. Like with this video, with the comments video, I don't really edit it at all. Like there'll be moments where I cough or sneeze or something, and I'll pause the recording and start up again. But it's mainly just me rambling because, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like I need to edit it that closely, as I'm sure you've realized by how rambly I am. But in the trial videos, I'm trying to be less that way. And I'm also trying to be really careful about what I publish. And so I'm spending a lot more time editing. And so once that's over, I'll be done. And I'll tell you, I'm self-employed. It was totally a self-imposed project that no one was asking me to do precisely in that way at that pace. But I can't, it's been a long time since I've felt like I was running a marathon and I've crossed a finish line, you know what I mean? Right now I can see the finish line and I'm almost there. I'll finally be able to like organize. I have all this, my office is all kind of discombobulated right now, and I've been putting that off, and I have all these like house projects and socializing things that I want to do, and other things for the podcast, and so and deep dives I want to do, and so I'll finally be able to do all that stuff, and I'm happy about that. And hope you can have something that you can be happy about, and everyone else, and everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do. Really.